Joining us now is Joe Edlow, Deputy USCIS. Great to have you with us, man. There's a lot of immigration policies that you guys are doing right now to protect the U.S. worker and to rise wages. Somehow, immigration has gone off the radar screen in this campaign, not like it was in 2016. I was hoping to get you on for a couple minutes, Director Edlow, if you could walk us through some of the things you guys are doing to raise wages and protect the U.S. worker.
So I think the most important thing we're doing right now is making sure that the H-1B program is working the way that it was intended to work by Congress. If I can just give you a second of background, H-1B was created by Congress as a high-tech or a high-skilled visa for U.S. employers to fill needed gaps in their labor market and to stay competitive in the global economy. However, what we've seen are U.S. employers using these workers at the lower levels to suppress American wages and to keep Americans out of these competitive jobs, especially at the entry level. So we're talking about, kids graduating from college or grad school trying to get into these high-tech sectors or these high-skilled sectors. They're not able to because we're importing so much foreign labor. 85,000 new ones per year is what the cap is for under Congress. That's what they've created. So we're competing with those individuals. So, there's a statutory provision for it. Can't change that. What we've got to do is make sure instead that we are enforcing the provisions of law and that we're keeping these employers honest. And that's what pretty much this reg and everything we're doing is all about.
You know how long we've been fighting this battle, Joe, and, finally we have an administration, the Trump administration and the president that gets it. Joe Edlow, Deputy Director of USCIS. This is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. For years, we have been fighting these phony H-1B visas that basically are driven in Congress by Wall Street, Goldman Sachs donors that are looking for one thing, Joe. They want one thing: cheap labor. That's it. They don't care about the U.S. worker. They don't care about kids coming out of college. And you always get on TV as, well, we need this so we can get oyster shuckers in Chesapeake Bay, so we can get farm pickers in Ocala, Florida. But that was what, like you said, that was what it was designed to do. It was designed to, we have a shortage, you get people in, meet the labor shortage. Now what it's become is flood the zone with tech workers, other people, flood the zone, lower wages, take jobs away. We've had circumstances, Director Edlow, as you know, where U.S. workers at a higher wage had to train their foreign HB workers, train their replacements, and then get fired.
So let's talk about that one. That's one of the things we wanted to address here. Again, there's nothing illegal with a third-party contractor bringing in these workers and then contracting them out to other U.S. employers. But we've seen how distasteful it is, right? What we've done is we still want to make sure that there's a clear employer-employee relationship, that the person who is petitioning for the alien is going to be supervising them, providing them the tools of whatever they're going to be doing, giving them assignments, evaluating them, and actually being, as you would think in normal terms, an employer, an actual supervisor for these people. But in those instances where it's a third-party contractor that's using these employees to go to other employers, instead of the typical 3-year visa, we're giving them 1 year. They can, of course, renew it, but we're giving them 1 year because that gives us the ability to check in and keep tabs on them to make sure that they are operating fairly, above board, and in compliance with the statutes, which unfortunately we've seen a lot of abuse in that. And I don't want to get into specifics, but you and I both know what we're talking about.
Well, exactly. When you look at the way this is done, Joe, how they've circumvented the system through this third-party hiring, it's basically like a temp agency, right? I mean, that's how they're set up. And this has been the unholy alliance for a long time between Democrats that are looking for cheap votes, right? Get these people over here, get them to vote, and then Republicans that are looking for their donor-based cheap labor. It's been an unholy alliance. It's skated through Congress over and over and over. You got big-time lobbyists from Goldman Sachs and Wall Street's, and they're scouring the globe looking at ways to bring down the cost of labor, which is at the direct expense of U.S. jobs. And for the first time, Joe, in my memory, for those of us that have been railing against this, for the first time we have an administration that understands how harmful this is to U.S. workers.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. We have been working very hard to protect the American workers through this and through other mechanisms. But, what we have seen, I'll give you one example. You probably already know it, but in the last 6 or 7 fiscal years, the percentage of H-1B employees coming over that are in the tech industry, in the IT industry specifically, has grown almost 75%. Now, in that same time period, the U.S. labor market for IT workers has only grown from 2.3 to 2.9%. So the wages are not going up. The American workers are not being able to get into these jobs because they're being supplanted by the foreign workforce here that's going in there. So this is really what we're trying to deal with. And ultimately, we've got to make sure, especially with this economy and with the recovering economy following COVID, we've got to make sure that employment opportunities are reserved for those that are here and that are eligible to work. To import foreign labor at this point just doesn't make sense unless it is a true specialty occupation. And that's why we've also tried to make it, we've updated the definition of specialty occupation to require the advanced degrees. Up until now, we haven't required it. We said, pretty much you probably should have one, but it's just usual or typical. No, now we're saying you must have one because we want to see these people come over and be paid at the highest wage levels so that when the U.S. workers are there, they're staying competitive and they can get the same jobs and the same opportunities at all levels.
We're with Joe Edlow, Deputy Director for Policy with USCIS. That's the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. Ken Cuccinelli, Acting Director of that. And Joe, you guys are doing a good job. When you came out with this new policy for HB1 visas, trying to reform it, restrict it, what kind of backlash have you gotten?
Well, I can't get into specifics on the lawsuits, but we've already got a lawsuit filed against it. Just like everything else, we do something, we put out our rationale for it, and we've got these.
And you get sued. It's unbelievable. Joe, we lost you. See if you can find Joe. Is he there?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Joe, go ahead.
Okay. Yes. No. So we're trying to work through it. We have not been enjoined. We're going to move forward with this rule and continue to fight this lawsuit and everything else that comes our way.
Yeah, and I tell you what, you're fighting lawsuits, you're fighting the swamp, you're fighting Wall Street, you're fighting Goldman Sachs. I mean, you guys are fighting a lot of things out there, all in order to help the U.S. worker. All right, Deputy Director Edlow, just close your ears for a minute. So I want to just make a clean break here and make a campaign statement. But it's unbelievable to me, and Joe doesn't have anything to do with this piece of the conversation. It's unbelievable to me that the fact that what Trump has done for the U.S. worker and what his administration has done in restricting these HB1 visas and trying to bring wages up and protect U.S. jobs is not a centerpiece of this campaign. The fake news refuses to cover it because they're controlled by the globalists who control Wall Street, not the nationalists, not the populists like us trying to help workers. They're controlled by the globalist, cheap labor, slave labor crowd. John Fredericks Radio Network with Deputy Director of Policy of USCIS, toughest acronym known to man, United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. Ken Cuccinelli runs that. My old nemesis battled him in the Cruz campaign, but we kissed and made up without the kiss. Joe Edlow is the Deputy Director of Policy with USCIS. Director Edlow, let's vision out here a second term. You're in the administration. You're going forward. What's your long-term vision for reforming our HB1 visa program?
Well, for me, it's more about making sure that people are staying within the confines of the law. So what I want to see before we even think about, and I think we can all agree, getting Congress to change anything is not going to happen. So we've got to do it internally.
Right.
So I want to see additional regulations aimed at fraud deterrence and keeping these employers honest and making sure that wages remain high. So that's a multi-pronged approach that starts with what the Department of Labor has already done, and they've already been sued on it, to increase the wage levels for H-1Bs. But after that, when the petition comes to us and USCIS begins to adjudicate it, I envision our fraud detection and national security unit, which is essentially our investigators, go out and actually do site visits and investigate whether there is actually a need for the employees based on what we are being told. I want to be able to verify everything that we are being told before we adjudicate and before we ultimately make a decision if we're going to approve the visa or not. And I think that is the key. The more that we are out there understanding where these employers are coming from and what they are saying they need, we're going to be able to have a better sense of what's accurate, what's not, does this pass the smell test, and move forward that way. But that's just the first part. I think there's a lot of other more technical issues within the program that we have the ability to reform. Our H-1B strengthening rule that I was just talking about is really just the first step. We tried to do that and a bunch of other things via memo, and we were enjoined and had to walk it back. And there are more technical things that we need to do within the H-1B program to really make it a sustainable program for the future and to avoid exactly what we were talking about in terms of the third-party employers using this as just a contracting agency for cheap labor. We've got to make sure that there is a clear employer-employee relationship, and that more importantly than anything, John, that USCIS is integrally a part of enforcing the law and enforcing this law and making sure that we're out there. So it's not just, we don't want anyone to think that it's a rubber stamp. And ultimately, if Congress wants to get there and lower the cap, so be it. We'll work within the confines of what we have, but, I think we can make a program that benefits the American workers and that really does do exactly what Congress intended.
Director Joe Edlow, how long have you been there?
Well, interesting question. I have been at USCIS. I joined in July of 2019 as the chief counsel. So I was the appointed chief counsel of the agency. And then when Ken Cuccinelli moved up to be the acting deputy secretary of the department, I stepped into the role to lead the daily operations of the agency. So back in February, I've been leading the agency since February through COVID, through our budget crisis and everything else.
You're doing a fantastic job, I got to tell you.
Thank
I love
you.
your vision and passion. It's been a lonely battle fighting this. I mean, when you're taking on the globalists and Wall Street and the gangster banksters and Goldman Sachs and everybody trying to get cheap labor, and then they scam it. And we had no allies for years. There was no allies. There was no allies on Capitol Hill because they didn't want to aggravate their donor base. I mean, it was sick what was going on. There are only a handful of us in the country that saw this. Man, I'm so happy you're there and you're doing a fabulous job in bringing light to this. And at the end of the day, all you want to do is give U.S. workers a fair opportunity to get a decent wage and not have to compete with the nonsense. And as you said, it's basically fighting the contract agencies for cheap labor. Joe, thank you for what you do. Thank you.
John,
excellent job.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.